Napoleon was born on August 15, 1769 on the island of Corsica in the Mediterranean Sea. When he was 15, he was offered a scholarship to l'École Militaire, where he trained to be an artillery officer. The revolution broke out in 1789, and due to the purge of officers who fought for the old regime, Napoleon had an opportunity to rise through the ranks. His first victory was against the counter-revolutionaries at the Siege of Toulon. Napoleon really rose to fame during the 13th Vendémiaire event when a royalist army tried to take over Paris. The Republican forces were only 5,000 men compared with the royalist army of 25,000. Fortunately for the Republic, Napoleon arrived before the royalist army and ordered 40 cannons to be placed where he thought they would strike. The royalist army was quickly repelled as their main force ran directly into Napoleon's cannons. What resulted was a slaughter. 1,400 royalists were killed, and Napoleon became a national hero for his defense of the Republic and was promoted commander of the Italian army. As soon as Napoleon arrived on the front lines, he began launching his attacks against Austria. After Napoleon defeated the Austrians at Mantua, he advanced to within 100 miles of Austria's capital of Vienna. The Austrians accepted defeat and signed the Treaty of Campo Formio in October of 1797. Belgium was ceded to France, and Austria had to recognize French control over the Rhineland and northern Italy. At the Battle of the Pyramids, Napoleon encountered the elite Egyptian fighting force known as the Mamluks. The Mamluks used their cavalry to overpower their enemy. The Mamluk cavalry charged the French, but Napoleon ordered the infantry to pack themselves into tightly formed squares. The French waited until the cavalry was within 10 to 30 meters away and then simultaneously opened fire. The cavalry charged into a barrage of musket balls. The waves of Mamluks kept coming, but failed to break through the French squares. The French army drove them into the Nile. Napoleon recorded 20,000 Mamluks dead, while his forces only suffered 29 deaths. Napoleon staged a coup against the French government known as the Directory on November 9, 1799, and named himself the first consul. This effectively put an end to the French First Republic. Napoleon learned that while he was in Egypt, the French had been driven out of the Alps by the Austrians, so he struck back, winning the Battle of Monegro. He attempted to make peace with the Austrians, but the Austrians were stubborn and would not negotiate. Napoleon decided to attack Austria again. He won at the Battle of Hohenlinden, which forced the Austrians to sign the Treaty of Luneville. Napoleon was declared emperor in 1804. During the coronation ceremony, he famously took the crown from the Pope's hands and placed it on his own head, effectively crowning himself. While Napoleon was emperor, he enacted a series of reforms. Napoleon's reforms included equality in the eyes of the law, no recognition of privileges of birth, freedom of religion, separation of church and state, and freedom to work in the occupation of one's choice. He also required the aristocracy to begin paying taxes, and he abolished the feudal system. At the beginning of the War of the Third Coalition, Napoleon prepared for an invasion of Britain. Unfortunately, the British Navy proved too much for the French, and the invasion was cancelled. Napoleon was informed that the Austrians were beginning to march east. Napoleon's victory over the Austrians and Russians at Austerlitz is considered one of the greatest military victories of all time, where he defeated a larger coalition force. Napoleon sprung a trap by intentionally making his own army appear weak, by retreating and abandoning strategic positions. He also feigned his desire for a truce and appeared panicked and anxious at the negotiations. Alexander I of Russia took this as a sign of French weakness and ordered an immediate attack. Coalition forces attacked Napoleon's weak right flank, moving the bulk of their forces away from the center. The French annihilated the coalition center, and the French split the army in two, outflanking and surrounding the enemy. The French victory at Austerlitz brought an end to the War of the Fourth Coalition. Napoleon commissioned the Arc de Triomphe to commemorate his victory. While Napoleon triumphed on land, the British Navy triumphed at sea. In an attempt to wage economic warfare upon Great Britain, Napoleon devised the Continental System. The Continental System was an embargo placed on British goods. The system prohibited French-occupied states and allies from buying products made in Britain. Alexander I of Russia, in violation of the continental system, began trading with the British. Napoleon threatened Alexander, however, it did not stop him from trading with the British. On June 23, 1812, 450,000 troops of the Grand Armée began marching east towards Russia. The Russians refused to engage Napoleon and retreated deeper and deeper into Russian territory, and Napoleon followed the Russian army deeper and deeper into Russian territory. By September 7th, the Russians had retreated all the way to Moscow. At the Battle of Borodino, the French won and inflicted heavy losses, but Napoleon did not succeed in destroying the Russian army. Napoleon approached the city of Moscow in the fall of 1812. Napoleon assumed that because the capital was on verge of capture, that Alexander I would negotiate a truce. However, Alexander I ordered Moscow to be burned. Napoleon's forces had nowhere to lodge, and he was forced to withdraw from the ruined city. Between the Russian winter and the attacks by the Russian army, thousands of troops died, and many deserted. Over 380,000 troops from the Grand Armée were killed in the retreat. By 1814, the Allies were closing in on Paris from all directions. His army was outnumbered 500,000 to 70,000. The Senate of Paris surrendered to Allied forces in March of 1814. Napoleon's army was still intact and he wanted to keep fighting. The Senate passed an act that removed Napoleon from power, so he planned to march on Paris to push out Allied forces and restore him as the leader of France. While regular soldiers wanted to keep fighting, his officers turned against him. He finally abdicated on April 4, 1814. The Allies exiled him to Elba, an island in the Mediterranean. Napoleon returned from exile on March 20, 1815. This was the beginning of what was called the 100 Days, where Napoleon ruled for approximately 100 days before he lost the Battle of Waterloo. At Waterloo, Napoleon attacked British forces under the command of the Duke of Wellington. His plan was to destroy Wellington's army and then concentrate on the Prussian army. Napoleon, however, underestimated Wellington, who held his ground long enough for the Prussian army to advance on his right flank. With both armies now bearing down on Napoleon, he had almost no chance. Repeated cavalry charges were eaten up by British musket fire. In a last-ditch effort, Napoleon sent his Imperial Guard to attack the British center. This did not work. One of Napoleon's generals came from behind Prussian troops and defeated their rear guard. However, this occurred too late to affect the outcome of the battle. After his defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon returned to Paris, where he was no longer welcome. He attempted to escape to the U.S. via boat, but British ships blocked the port which he was attempting to sail out of. The Treaty of Paris, signed in November of 1815, officially removed Napoleon from power. The Allies exiled Napoleon this time to St. Helena, where he died in 1821 at an age of 51. There is no question that Napoleon was one of the greatest military commanders of all time. However, he is also one of the most controversial figures of all time. Historians are divided on his legacy, and although he is celebrated by the French, many see him as a tyrant. He may have been a tyrant, but he was pretty enlightened as far as tyrants go. Napoleon was at an almost constant state of war with Europe for at least 15 years. But why would the Europeans continue to declare war on France after Napoleon won so decisively? People generally want to avoid wars that they can't win. But the rest of Europe did not have a choice. Europe was so afraid that France's radical ideas would spill into neighboring countries, creating revolutionarist environment. This was sort of a 19th century domino theory, in which if a revolution occurred in France, then a revolution could occur in Austria, Great Britain, Russia, etc. So was Napoleon the real tyrant, or was it the kings of Europe who sent their subjects to fight against an enemy that respected the rights of man? That is for you to decide.
All my life I want money and power, respect my mind or die from last shout. I pray my get big as the Eiffel Tower, so I can f the world for 72 hours. Damn, I feel amazing. Damn, I'm in the matrix. My mind is living on cloud nine, and this nine is never on vacation. Start up that mind.